Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Caitlin, and in February I took my middle splits from looking like this to looking like this by doing a challenge where I stretched my middle splits every single day. And during that challenge, I kind of fine-tuned and really perfected my middle splits stretching routine. So today's video, I'm going to be walking you through that entire routine. Now, before we get into the actual routine, I do want to chat about just some general things that I think are helpful and that I like to keep aware of, just that I've learned in my time as like a stretch and flexibility instructor, and also particularly in this challenge as it pertains to the middle splits. First is that I like to pair my stretch sessions with a targeted strength workout. So in the case of middle splits, I always found that my best stretching was happening when I was doing it right after an intense leg workout in the gym. So loading up with heavy weights and trying to push myself as hard as I could in terms of the weights in the gym. For middle splits in particular, I love abductor adductor machine at the gym, and even if I didn't have time to do like a full gym workout before stretching, if I could fit in just abductor adductor, maybe a couple of other things, that was great. In addition to abductor adductor, hip thrusts, I think, because glutes are a very important part of the middle splits, so that's something that I was kind of prioritizing throughout my middle splits training journey, is like that strength work in the gym. And I find that that's really important to make sure that your legs are like strong enough to support you. Like, it's good just in general, but especially if you're trying to like train and increase your flexibility. I know that there is like a very common belief that like as you get stronger, you get less flexible, and like that stereotype of like gym bros who are like not flexible at all. I know that is a stereotype, and that's like a thing that people claim is like you can't be strong and flexible. But for me, especially because the type of like fitness and exercise that I do, with being pole dancing and aerial sports, it requires so much like control and strength in your flexibility. I think it's really important to maintain that strength and keep that strength while pushing your flexibility, so you're not getting the flexibility at the expense of the stability and strength that you need to support it. So 100% recommend making sure that you are doing strength training along with your flexibility training. And like I said, really encourage and really enjoy doing a workout right before I stretch, like a targeted strength workout, because I find my legs then, especially like for middle splits, if I do abductor, adductor, if I do some hip thrusts, if I do some other like leg work in the gym, squats, lunges, etc., it just means my legs are so nice and warm and ready for that stretch. Now, I said there were two ways. So the second way that I like to incorporate this idea of like strength in my flexibility is through actual like active flexibility drills in my specific stretch routine. So I will talk about this in a little bit more detail when I go through the actual routine itself, but I really am a strong proponent of the fact that you should not just be doing exclusively passive holds in your flexibility training. I think that you do need to incorporate active flexibility drills where you are requiring strength through the range of motion that you're trying to train and trying to get flexible in. So that's going to look like, for middle splits, like a lot of leg lifts, a lot of like lifting with control, rather than just like sitting in the split by itself and not doing anything else. That said, this brings me to my kind of like second general point, is I do think that passive kind of sits and holds in a stretch can be incredibly helpful for just unlocking that range of motion in general. So I like to do both, and this is something that I find is like particularly for middle splits, at least for me personally, that there is nothing better for improving my middle splits than just sitting in a middle split. And that's kind of like what I fine-tuned by the end of like the month-long flexibility challenge for my middle splits that I was doing, was that I really realized that I needed to just be like at the end of every session sitting in the middle splits for a minute, not just once, not just twice, but like 3 times, to really get like a nice deep stretch and start actually making that improvement in my flexibility. I find, for me personally in particular, when I'm stretching my middle splits, I find that usually the first middle split that I do, where I'm holding for a minute, even after warming up my legs, great, like doing a strength session in the gym, doing all of my like auxiliary flexibility exercises, stretch exercises, that first middle split hold is never the one that I make progress on. It's always kind of just the same, and then it's only going into it for a second time, for a third time, and holding and really like maintaining that stretch for ideally a minute, as long as possible, as long as I can. That's really where I'm making that progress and those gains in the actual like middle splits position itself. So moral is, I believe both have a place, both like active flexibility drills as well as passive holds. I incorporate both into my routine and try and make sure that I'm hitting both of those so that I'm still like increasing in my strength, in my active range, while I'm also improving in my passive range as well. Now, the other thing that I think is really important when it comes to flexibility training is consistency. And I think that the more frequently you stretch, the better. Now, I don't necessarily need to think that you need to be doing what I was doing for my 28-day challenge, which is stretching every single day. And in fact, if you're going for like super high intensity in every single one of your stretch sessions, every single day is probably going to be too much. And what I did for my challenge, if you watch that video, is like there was definitely variation in the intensity that I was doing. But that said, if you want to make progress in your flexibility, and particularly if you want to make progress as quickly as is like feasible for you, you do need to be stretching fairly regularly, fairly consistently. And I would say like ideally like 3 to 4 times per week of like relatively high intensity of your flexibility training. It's going to help you make the most progress that you can. If you are only stretching once a week, sure, you might improve, but you're definitely not going to improve as quickly as if you are stretching 3 times per week. And now this does get tricky if you are trying to stretch and improve in multiple different aspects of flexibility at the same time. So if you're trying to improve your middle splits, your front splits, your back bends, your shoulders, all at the same time, then you might need to stretch more than 3 times per week, because you might need to focus on like upper body versus lower body on different days in order to actually see the progress. But like if you're just thinking middle splits, want to improve my middle splits, I would say target stretch your middle splits 3 to 4 times per week, and try and go for like relatively high intensity. Maybe do light mobility work on the days when you're not doing like higher intensity stretching, just to keep up with that consistency and mobility. What you'll find is obviously that like when you're stretching at a high intensity, you do get stiff the next day. So doing some like lighter mobility work, just getting your body moving, returning the blood flow, and focusing on your recovery as well is really good. I love a Theragun massager for when I'm feeling stiff, especially after flexibility training, and heat packs are great. Love that for when you have really like worked quite intensely on your flexibility, you're feeling that stiffness the next day. Heat packs, massage gun are gonna be great. And that is pretty much like wrapping up into the last point, which is that your recovery is important. No matter what type of fitness activity you are doing, if you are training anything at a relatively high intensity, or even just a high intensity for you, you definitely want to make sure that you are recovering and that you are giving your body the time to recover that it needs. And recovery means a lot of different things. I could make a whole separate video on recovery. I feel like I could talk for ages about this, but for everything from like how you eat, the nutrition that you're giving your body, making sure you're sleeping well, your actual like recovery of like using Theraguns, of getting sauna sessions in, all of those different things are all going to contribute to how much you're actually able to improve. If you're not treating your body well and actually prioritizing your rest and recovery as much as you are your training, you're definitely not going to see the improvements that you want to see. And that applies to everything, not just flexibility, but it is important to keep in mind with flexibility as well, especially as, like I said, you're getting stiff after the sessions, you're feeling like your muscles are really like working hard to increase your range of motion, to increase that flexibility. You need to be treating them well, and you need to be focusing and prioritizing your recovery just as much as you are your flexibility training. But that is my little spiel of all my just general principles. From here, let's actually get into the actual middle splits mobility routine. So like I said, this is what I kind of came up with as my like ideal based middle splits stretch routine throughout my 28-day flexibility middle splits challenge. I tweaked and I adjusted this throughout the 28 days that I was training it. And I feel like this is like the routine that I nailed down that really helped me improve the most with my middle splits and felt really good about. So I will, without further ado, get into this. Like I said, I was generally doing a like strength workout beforehand. So minimum abduction, adduction on the machines at gym, adding in some other strength leg exercises on top of that. And then this is the routine that I was following. Okay, and without further ado, let's get into this middle splits stretch session. I'm setting up here in the gym. I've got a mat, I've got a foam roller, and I've got a kettlebell. This definitely can be done without a kettlebell. However, if you do have something heavy or something similar to a kettlebell that you can use, highly recommend it. And then the foam roller is nice for some of the later stretches that we do, but you can, again, definitely do this without the foam roller if you don't have access to one. So first thing I do, weighted with the kettlebell, is some sumo squats, trying to go as deep as possible with these and also nice and slow. I will usually do about 10 to 12 reps of these before I get into some pulses, just pulsing as quickly up and down as I can. And then I'll go into my nice hold in this position on my forearms and holding for about 30 seconds. From there, going straight into my side lunges. I alternate sides here, and I use the kettlebell just for a little bit of extra support since I have it, trying to go as deep as possible to each side and not going too quickly here, trying to hold each one for a little bit in the end position. Once I've done about 10 to 12 per side, I will go in for my nice holding here for about 10 to 20 seconds. Again, trying to get as deep as possible and making sure I'm stretching really nicely into the inner thigh, keeping the heel of the bent leg down on the floor as I try to sink my bum as low as possible. Next, I'm setting up in a nice wide leg forward fold and going into these, which are my favorite. It's just like kind of pulses in a wide leg forward fold. I'm reaching forward in between my legs and then all the way through my legs. These ones, I'm trying to go with a little bit of pace, a little bit of speed, picking up a little bit of momentum to get a really nice deep stretch in my hamstrings. And these I find are a really good way to warm up my hamstrings, specifically for these like pancake middle splits type stretches. Once I've done about 10 to 12 of the front, middle, back, I will then pulse backwards also about 10 times and then just do a nice hold here, hanging down into the forward fold. Next, we go into another side lunge type exercise, except this time we start in a forward lunge and then lift up into that side lunge as I do, again, making sure that that heel is staying down, sinking my bum as low as possible. And then from there, I twist all the way back through the front lunge and then push my hip down into like that kind of side stretch position. I don't know what it's called, but it's a really good stretch. So rotating here in and out of this side lunge, I do usually about 8 to 10 per side. And once I've finished with my 8 or 10 on the one side, I do like to hold this like nice side stretch position, really trying to push and open through the side of the body to get a nice stretch there as well. Then I go into what is a relatively new exercise for me. Actually, it's kind of a running pigeon type of situation. So I'm going from a pigeon, leaning down nice and deep into that glute stretch, and then lifting my leg up and stepping it forward into a nice lunge, really trying to get as much lift with the leg and rotation through the hip joint as I go from the lunge into the pigeon to really mobilize into that hip joint. Depending on the day and how my glutes and hip flexors are feeling, I might hold the pigeon or the lunge stretch at the end for about a minute, but then I set up in my straddle and start off by some nice long reaches forwards, trying to keep my back as straight as possible, and then rolling up again, just stretching into those hamstrings and inner thighs in this like pancake position. After about 8 to 12 of those, I then reach forward as far as I can, holding in a nice straddle stretch, really rolling the shoulders back, and I'll hold there for usually about a minute. Then next up is my half straddle sequence. So I start off by setting up in my nice half straddle position and doing a couple of big reaches over to the side, trying to keep the chest nice and open, elbow towards the ceiling, and really reaching as close to my ankle and my foot as I can with each one of these. Now, these are not technically a middle splits stretch, but I do like to include them because my side body can get really stiff and really tight. So I just add these in as a little extra since I'm in this position anyway. After about 8 to 10 of those reaches, it's then a nice 30-second to 1 minute long hold in the side stretch itself. Then I turn to face the leg, reaching as far down as I can for a nice hamstring stretch. This I will hold for a minute. I'll put myself on the timer for it. I really try and extend my back as much as possible, really trying to compress my stomach towards my thigh as I lengthen through the back to really get a nice deep hamstring stretch. I also do often feel this in my back as well, again, because my side body and my back can be a little bit tight, but I generally at least feel something in the hamstring as well. After the minute there, I then reach forward in front of of me and go into a nice half straddle stretch. Again, trying to keep the back nice and straight, trying to really stretch as much as possible into the hamstring and the inner thigh, pulling myself a little bit deeper with each exhale that I have here. And this is another stretch that I will hold for a minute on the clock on the timer. And then when I am done, I repeat the entire sequence over on the other side. Once I have done both sides, I will then position myself in another straddle, and I do some little circles here. So dipping my chest over to one side, circling forward, and then to the other side, making these kind of like half circles. I find this a really nice way to really just like warm up and mobilize into my straddle stretch. So doing usually about like 8 to 12 of these in total. And after that, I am ready for my second straddle hold of the stretch session. I really try and push my bum a little bit forward. In these straddles, I'm really trying to get a nice tilt at my pelvis. So I'm trying to really be on the front of my pelvis and not the back of the pelvis. And that helps me keep a nice straight lower back, really trying to avoid any rounding in the lower back, keeping it as arched as possible, reaching as far forward as possible, and really just pulling with my hands into as deep a straddle stretch as I can get, holding here like usual for 1 minute. After the second straddle stretch, I then get onto my hands and knees, one leg out to the side, and I do some leg lifts here. I am not that great at these yet, but in them, I'm trying to not allow my weight to shift too much over to the side that is not lifting. So trying to keep the rest of my body nice and aligned as I do those leg lifts. After about 10 of those, I then go into this kind of half kneeling position. And all I'm doing here is sinking down with my hips into this like half lungy position and then pushing back up into the more like kneeling position. After about 10 to 12 of those, I will then hold the little lunge position for about 10 or so seconds just to really get into that stretch. And now is the point where I'll use the foam roller. So I'll lift my leg up, pop it onto the foam roller. So like my foot or ankle on the foam roller. And then I am hands down for a little bit of balance and sliding out as far as I can and sliding back into this like half frog position. You can also do this without the foam roller. When I don't have a foam roller with me, I do just slide on my sock. The important thing here is that I am really focusing on squeezing through my inner thighs, contracting as much as possible when I am coming up, and then releasing all the way down, really trying to get that engagement in the inner thighs and really working into them as I'm going in and out of this stretch. After about 10 of those, I then slide into my absolute maximum position in this half frog side stretch and then pop down onto my forearms. And while I'm here, I then do 10 kind of arching and rounding into my lower back, really trying to mobilize my spine, arching and rounding. You'll feel if you do this that it kind of shifts the position of the stretch and kind of moves it into different places in your inner thighs. And I find it just like a really nice way to mobilize in this. But once I've done those, I then go into some rocks. So I push my bum backwards and then bring it forwards in line with my knee and my foot again. So just rocking in and out of there. And again, it shifts kind of the position of the stretch. Once I've done my arching and rounding in the lower back, my rocking backwards and forwards, I then make sure that my position is nicely set up with my foot and my knee and my hips and my other knee all in one straight line, as straight as I possibly can get it. And then I will hold this half split, half frog stretch position for about 1 minute. That whole sequence, of course, gets repeated on the other side. And then once that's done, I bring myself into my favorite glute stretch, my double pigeon. For this, you want to make sure that your ankle is nicely stacked on top of your knee, your other knee is nicely stacked on top of your ankle, and that your shins are making a straight line with the edge of the mat. I don't usually hold this for too long, just a nice little stretch on each side, trying to fold over as deeply as I can while feeling that nice glute stretch. After my double pigeons, I then set myself up for essentially a bent leg version of the straight leg lifts from earlier. Again, with these, I'm trying not to let my body weight shift too much over to one side to compensate, really trying to make sure that the lift of the leg is coming from the squeeze of the glutes as much as possible. And then finally, after about 10 to 12 of those on each side, I am ready for my middle splits hold. And I just simply slide straight out into it, making sure I've got my timer set on my watch. I'm holding here this first one for a minute. As I am holding in this middle split, I am really trying to make sure that my legs, my hips, my knees, my ankles are in one straight line and that I'm not shifting out of alignment. Sometimes I will do this up against a wall with my bum like right pressed up against the wall as I slide into it to make sure that I really can't cheat with the alignment. But otherwise, I'm just kind of constantly looking from left to right, checking my feet. If I've got a mirror next to me, looking in the mirror, making sure that I'm in one straight line and that I'm not compensating anywhere. Once I am feeling good and have relaxed into it a little bit, I will generally try and then push up onto my arms to try and lower my chest down as much as possible. I find this really helps push me a little bit deeper into the middle splits, but it is extremely intense, so I generally don't hold it for too long before coming back to the forearms and then eventually at my minute mark coming all the way out of the splits. And that was round 1 of the middle splits holds. I generally will do some kind of like rotations into my hips and just try and loosen them out just a little bit before I go into round 2 of the split. Again, making sure that my timer is set up and sliding into it just like before. Sometimes the second middle split feels better. Sometimes literally at first it feels a little bit worse because my legs are now a little bit tender from the first one. But regardless, just trying to hold and push as deeply as I can. Whenever I am stretching, particularly doing like a long hold stretch, I'm really trying to focus on my breathing as much as possible to really just try and calm down my nervous system, taking lots of deep breaths in and out, and with every exhale trying to just relax into the stretch and get a little bit deeper. I go again trying to push down onto my chest, trying to see how much of a release I can get. And here I was really looking to try and get my calves as close to the floor as possible. And then after a short break, it is time for round 3. Again, setting up exactly the same way, making sure I'm on the clock on my timer for 1 minute. Sometimes, again, my legs are feeling it by this point, so it takes a little while to ease into it. But generally, once I then allow myself to relax into it, I'm able to get a little bit deeper than I was in the previous stretches. And then once a minute is up in the round 3 middle splits stretch, I know that the hard part is pretty much over. I then just need to kind of release out my legs. I do a couple of windscreen wipers side to side once I actually manage to get out of the middle splits position. My legs by this point are usually very tender, particularly in the inner thighs, but just side to side, rocks with the knees, and then I will lie down onto my back to go into a lying down glutes stretch. So one ankle on top of my knee and then pulling the legs in towards the chest to get a really nice glute stretch. I don't really time these. I just kind of do them for however long feels good, 1 per side. And then I will finish off my short little cool down with just a quick happy baby. Again, not really timing this or holding it for anything particularly long, just making sure that I feel good to stand up.